probably haven't thought much about the soil under your feet as you're walking, but you should. Without that soil, we wouldn't have agriculture. Without agriculture, you'd be naked and hungry. So we're going to take a few minutes to look at that soil. We're going to examine the properties that make it good for plants and learn a little bit about how to measure those. And we should have some fun playing in the dirt. Tilth is a fancy way of saying texture, structure, and pore space. Those things are very important for planting a garden, especially important in a place like Colorado where we sometimes can find some pretty poor soil. What I'm going to do is a simple test to tell you what your soil is made up of. In order to do that, we need these things here. We have 2 jars, which I'm going to fill about a third full of soil. I've got some dishwashing soap, we need about a teaspoon of that. Paper to put the soil on, a little shovel for the dirt, and the paper I'm going to spread the dirt on to get rid of sticks and rocks and stuff. The soil from my garden bed, it's got a lot of mulch on it, so I got to dig through that first to get to the soil. I have a feeling that the soil isn't going to be very good because it was put in by the landscapers. They put landscaping fabric down, and that never makes for good soil beneath it. Okay, I've exposed some of the soil. I had to push away a lot of mulch, which I put down. And I got a good shovelful of soil. You can already tell that this is really clay and not really very good for planting. That looks like about enough. Stop. Okay, here's a quick look at the instructions for what we're about to do. If you need to pause the video, you can. And I'm taking my soil, dumping it on a newspaper, and I break up the clumps and take the sticks and other stuff out of it. You can see some roots from plants and some other stuff in there. Cut. Cut. Okay, just for comparison, I've taken some potting soil that I have broccoli and some other plants growing in indoors, which I'm going to transplant outside when the weather gets better. This is a commercial soil. It's going to be really good. It's full of organic matter, and I think just for comparison, I'll do an experiment with this one as well as one from my outdoor beds. Cut. Okay, I've got both my jars about 3/4 full of water. The potting soil and the clay type soil from the front yard. I'm going to put about a teaspoon of dishwashing powder in each of them. I already put one in the potting soil. And then I'm going to shake them for 8 minutes. Cut. Okay, I'm shaking this jar. I said about 8 minutes is good. Longer is better, but what we're doing is we're breaking down the aggregate clumps. We're making a nice yucky mush. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes, closer to 12. I'm going to stop shaking these things. I'm going to put them up on the shelf, kind of out of the way. And as soon as I set them down, I'm going to get my watch, because in about a minute, I'm going to make a mark, and then in 2 hours, I'm going to make a mark. And then it could be as long as 1 to 3 days before we get our last one. Okay. Okay, it's been about a minute. You can see a little bit of sand starting to form right about here on the one from outside. And the potting soil, you really can't tell anything. Potting soil has probably got so little sand in it because it's a commercial potting soil that we may not see a lot, but you can see a little bit finer grains down about to this line. Okay. Well, it's been 3 days, and there hasn't been much settling at all in this jar to the right, the one from my yard. It's clearly majority clay soil, very distinct line is now formed between the clay and the water. The water is still very dark. So it's pretty clear why nothing grows very well below the landscaping fabric, which is another reason to avoid landscaping fabric if you can. It's good for keeping weeds out, but the soil below it gets starved for oxygen and any other organic nutrients that might have filtered down to it. Now it's time to see the end of our experiment. Got both jars out here in the sunlight, well, what little sunlight there is, and you can see some very clear layers in one of the jars and then some kind of varied layers in the other jar. Remember, this one was the potting soil. This one was the clay soil from my front yard garden beds. Take a good look at this soil. There's the very clear definition of where the clay layer starts, and then you get down to a... Okay, now it's time to measure our results and record what we found. I've got a tape measure, pen, paper, and the instructions that you're going to be providing in class. So first thing we do is go to the potting soil. We've got about 4.5 inches overall content, including water. I'll put that on here, 4.5 inches. The clay soil from my front yard, we have about the same, 4.5. Then we're going to check the sand layer. In this one there appears to be about 1/2 inch of sand. Could be a little bit less. In this one, it's not detectable. I'm not even going to measure the sand because I can't find any. So sometimes you find what you don't expect when you're doing an experiment. Next is thickness of silt. In this one you can see, oops, here we go. There's probably about 1.5 inches to 1.75 inches of silt. In this one there's only about, call it 3/4 of an inch. Now for clay, we've got about, measuring from tip to tip, about another 1.75 inches. And this one is almost completely clay. I'll call that right about 3 inches. Cut. Okay, so here's a printout of what we just did, and you can take a look at this and you'll probably get a copy in class as well. Much of the information I got for this class was from The Science of Gardening, my textbook for horticulture from Dr. David Whiting at the Colorado State University.